Hello, everyone. My name is Sister Estelle, and on behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to our webinar today with our friend and author, Luke Larson. Walking as a way of keeping company while keeping our social distance is the perfect theme for combining spirituality, mindfulness, and a little outdoor time. A recording of today's presentation will be available later to share with anyone who couldn't join us, and we'll also let you know how to get a copy of Luke Larson's book, Keeping Company with Saint Ignatius, Walking the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. There will be a time for questions at the end of this hour, so please do use your Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to post any questions, and we'll get to those. I will be posting various links in the chat bar, so if you'd like to keep that open as well, please do. Luke Larson is not only a wonderful author, but provides spiritual direction, discernment coaching, and privately directed retreats to people all over the country, mostly by phone or video conferencing. His wife, Evie, recently joined his private practice as a certified spiritual director and retreat director. Together, the couple enjoys sunrise walks along the Clark Fork River, just a stone's throw from their condo in Missoula, Montana, and they feel so blessed to have their family, including their 4 grandchildren, all relatively close. As a Jesuit seminarian during the 80s, Luke gained proficiency in the art of discernment, helping others and making God-centered decisions, which is now the cornerstone of his spiritual direction and coaching practice. 3 times, Luke and Evie walked the Camino de Santiago, a 500-mile pilgrimage route across northern Spain. Insights gained from their first trek were the impetus for Luke's book, Keeping Company with Saint Ignatius, published by Paraclete Press, of course. We are also joined today by John Sweeney, who is Paraclete's publisher and editor, and the author of over 30 books, including the St. Francis Prayer Book, The Complete Francis of Assisi, Lord, Make Me an Instrument of Your Peace, and When St. Francis Saved the Church, which is the winner of a 2015 award in history from the Catholic Press Association, as well as a charming fiction series for children, The Pope's Cat. He lives in Milwaukee with his wife and daughters. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Luke and John.
Delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Great to have you.
So am I. And hello, I am John. I am here to interview Luke so that you can get to know him and his book. I have his book right here, which, Luke, I was going to confess to you before we started that I accidentally left it outside 2 nights ago. And it poured all night long. So my copy now does this, but it stays together really nicely. And I was thinking that this was relevant because when you walk the Camino, you probably carry a book or 2 with you, and halfway through it looks like this, I would guess, huh?
Exactly, right.
So let me say one thing as background about your book, which is to say that in about 20 years of being an editor and a book publisher and looking at book proposals from authors, I probably told you this, Luke, at the time when we were publishing your book, I have probably seen 100 book proposals from writers who have walked the Camino and then write a memoir about it. It seems that almost every person who walks the Camino who also likes to type out their stories or their memoir wants to write a book about it. Why? What is it about the Camino, that 500-mile walk across the top of Spain, that grabs people so much by the heart?
They say that there are as many reasons for doing the Camino as there are pilgrims on the Camino. And because that number has increased exponentially year by year, you know, the Camino de Santiago has become incredibly popular. Those numbers of the reasons for doing it, I think just are it's true that there's all kinds of reasons. People do it to, you know, for a vigorous hike and or a bike. People do it for all kinds of spiritual reasons as well. And I like that notion that it doesn't, and this comes out of the movie The Way, starring Martin Sheen and directed by his son Emilio Estevez, that it doesn't matter why you start out to do it. Somehow, grace gets through. You find some kind of deeper meaning. You say, and that's got to be, in my mind anyway, the reason for its popularity. It can't be just that it's a vigorous hike.
Well, and so let's actually
Yeah.
back up. I realize
Yeah.
we should back up because I don't want to get ahead of anyone who's watching who doesn't know, for instance, the vocabulary that we're talking about. So
Right.
tell us what does Camino mean? What does Santiago de Compostela mean? And also tell us, what is it, how did it originate? And why did a medieval man or woman walk this route?
Perfect, great, yes, thank you. So Camino is Spanish for the way or the road, and it conveys that sense of a route, And the Santiago is Spanish for James, and so it's the route, the way of Saint James. And it has an incredible history. It goes back 1,000 years. In medieval times, pilgrims would start out from wherever, they didn't have a bus or something to take them to a embarkation place, but so they walked out their door and they walked whatever that distance to Santiago in the northwestern corner in the Galician country, province or area of Spain, and where the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela is, and it's thought to be the traditional burial place. The remains of St. James the Apostle are there entombed in the cathedral. So that's the destination. People start out typically today on the French side of the Pyrenees in a little town, picturesque little town called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and then they immediately trek right over the Pyrenees and are on their way 500 miles, 800 kilometers to Santiago. Many pilgrims today as well are ending their pilgrimages out on the coast, either in Muxia or Finisterre. And so, why did they do it 1,000 years ago? Why are people doing it? By and large, spiritual reasons. Some did it because it was an alternative to going to jail. If you do this pilgrimage, we won't lock you up. And some actually were paid to do it on behalf of their kings or their royalty. But back to more of the basic people, they did it for this is an experience of pilgrimage, of walking with God, being present with God on the way. The adage that what they would say then and is just as true today, it's not about the destination, although everybody's headed towards Santiago. It's about the trip. It's about the pilgrimage. It's about praying on the way.
But now the medieval person who did it was accomplishing something different from most modern folks who do it, right? I mean, they were doing something that related to indulgence, that related to eternity, salvation. Say something about that so that people who aren't too familiar with this, the sort of mindset of medieval pilgrimage, because that's where this began, and that's a lot of what it's all about. How is that? Tell us what that was, and maybe how does that differ from someone today who wants some really good exercise and fresh air?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So people would do it for the remittance of sin, for doing penance, for writing their relationship with God somehow. And there were indulgences at the time, and that helped, people's contributions helped to fund not only the bridges and, the way itself, but the cathedral at Santiago, which is an incredible structure. But people would do it carrying big mason blocks and stuff because they wanted to contribute to the building of, they wanted their part. Artisans did it, and the French artisans were recruited to come on over and help build the way for us. There are a great number of people we met, quite a number of them ourselves, who really are doing it for the adventure. And they're doing it for a unique, not just vacation, but an experience. That was not our intention ever, and we did 2 Caminos since the one that I wrote the book about. Ours was always to be a spiritual retreat on foot, a praying on our feet type thing. But we don't judge, anybody that decide, however people decide to do it, that's perfectly fine. For us, it was important that we carry everything in lightweight backpacks, and that we walk the entire way. We never got in a motorized vehicle. That was important to us. We were okay with staying in hotels, hostels, rural houses, that type of thing, thinking that the medieval pilgrims didn't say, I'm going to stick around I'm going to stay in some stinky, hovel in order to give these guys in the future some sense of, what an authentic pilgrimage is. They stayed in the best places that they could at that time, the inns and the, monasteries and such. So anyway, that my take on.
Yeah. Well, I actually was going to ask you about that part because I've read a lot of books about the Camino over the years, and I know that a lot of people who walk it will write about where they stay, how many miles they walk each day, what they have set up as the parameters for their journey, including how often do they permit themselves to stay at an inn or a hotel where they can take a nice bath, for instance. And I remember some accounts where maybe only once every few days or once a week or only once during the whole journey do they allow themselves such luxury. What kinds of, say more about the sort of rules that you set up for yourself on the journey that you write about in the book.
So on our first pilgrimage, we did not have anything booked ahead other than we might have the person at this hotel or rural house call ahead. So we took what we could get. What we could get was a decent hotel. We're all for that. We had fellow pilgrims that were just covered with bedbug bites, and early on in their pilgrimage, and I'm glad I didn't stay at that albergue. We did stay at albergues and refugios, as they say, those communal housing places along the Camino when we needed to. But otherwise, it was booking into rural houses, hotels. Our rule said, our personal commitment was to always walk wherever we go. So you have pilgrims today that so they arrive in Burgos, let's say, and there's just this nice chalet 10 kilometers out of town. Let's take the taxi out there. We'll come back to the same spot and resume our pilgrimage the next day. To us, that wasn't authentic. Again, not judging anybody else, but to us, for us, it was important that this is a walking pilgrimage. And so not to jump in and out of that.
Yeah.
A nice bath at the end of the day for older people is a nice luxury. Meaning, you know, in those crowded albergues where you're elbow to elbow in your bunks and stuff with other people, and the showers are communal and everything. It was pretty nice to, you know, have our own bathroom at the end of the day.
I'll bet.
One Italian lady, young lady that we were talking to on this last pilgrimage, she couldn't speak English incredibly well. We couldn't speak Italian, so we would kind of use a little bit of Spanish. And she says, "Well, why do you stay at a hotel?" And I said, "Muy viejo, we're old. we're old people."
Well, all right. Now I want to ask one other question about sort of the medieval origins of everything, which is that, if memory serves, the Golden Legend, that great text of saints' lives from the Middle Ages, tells the story that Saint James, Santiago, died in the Holy Land somewhere, and then was transported sort of mysteriously by boat once he was dead, and landed at the spot that is now the end of the Camino, which, if you look at a map, is a long way away from Tel Aviv. And it's that miracle in this hagiography of St. James that is one of the foundations of the Camino itself. And it's an important, I mean, it was unquestioned probably by those who lived in the late Middle Ages. Today, of course, we question these things routinely. And today, a lot of people would say, you know, we don't experience miracles in the way that those who came before us once did. Say something about the Camino and how it relates to miracles, both in the past and in the present, in the lives of those that you've spent time with and in your own life.
Yeah, so that story of how the beheaded remains of St. James got into a stone barge, basically a boat, made its way entirely on its own, unmanned, other than his body, made its way to the shore of Galicia, and then you know, I don't know what the distance is, but lots of kilometers inland to Santiago, and then was discovered by a shepherd. It's a great story, but and do you have to believe it? No. You know? But our experience of companioning Saint Ignatius and Saint James, and you know, Saint Luke. You know, I mean, holy men of heaven, holy men and women of heaven, didn't depend on you know, the authenticity of that particular story, and I don't want to attest to miracles. I think they probably happen, but incredible things happen on the Camino, which can be considered miraculous, and just people's generosity, their return to faith, their praying that their passport that was lost 6 days ago suddenly shows up. You know, those kinds of remarkable experiences.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it, that places like the Camino de Santiago de Compostela and Lourdes in France and the Hajj, which is in the news today, 50 years ago, 75 years ago, there were predictions on the covers of newspapers and magazines that these things were dead and they would soon be completely gone from modern life. That hasn't happened at all. If anything, these places, these journeys, pilgrimage itself is more popular than ever. Why do you think that is?
Well, let me turn, and I think it bridges both of your questions and what we're talking about. Marcus Borg, I want to get his name right, he wrote The Heart of Christianity. And he talks about the Celtic Christian notion of the fact that there are places in our world, and he calls them thin places, thin, where the boundary between the transcendent and the immanent of God's transcendence and immanence is permeable, soft, pliable. And I believe that the Camino is one of those places. And I think there are, many others in our world, but they're just places where grace comes through. God, the veil lifts, grace happens, God reveals God's self, and people are changed. Whether you start out as a pilgrim, whether you start out for spiritual reasons, whether that change doesn't take place on the Camino, but months later, years later, how that affects you. I can only believe that the Camino is one of those thin places just because of what you're talking about. People keep coming, and it's not just that the Larsons are crazy people, that we've done it 3 times and we'd be willing to do it, we'd love to do it again. It's a draw. There's something to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, now let's change gears slightly. I want people to get to know you a little bit more. And this will also be a way for them to get to know your book, Keeping Company with Saint Ignatius. An interesting title for a walk on the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. You were a Jesuit in formation for 8 years, right? 30 to 40 years ago. Is that why you took Saint Ignatius with you, metaphorically speaking, on the Camino? I mean, that's not a natural pairing, is it?
No, you're right. You're right. The traditional companion, arm in arm buddy, would be St. James, on the way of St. James. And let me put this disclaimer in. We didn't snub St. James. We appreciated his company. We enjoyed seeing his statues along the way. But the notion of companioning St. Ignatius came from, as you were mentioning, my background as a Jesuit studying for the priesthood in the 80s. What I wanted to do, well, first of all, the idea of this pilgrimage across Spain came from our daughter. She read about it and stuff and started getting excited about it. I didn't want any part of that. I'm thinking about a pilgrimage today to Medjugorje or something, with a crowded bus and, people toddling up to put flowers on a statue. That didn't make any sense. But then I started, what is this? It's a walking pilgrimage across Spain that goes right through Ignatius's homeland, the Basque area of Spain. That appealed to me. So that drew my interest right away. I could walk on this trail across and get acquainted with the places, Pamplona and others, where Ignatius once walked himself. Now, John, we have the Camino Ignaciano, or the Ignatian Way, and that didn't exist. It was just coming into being when we were doing our Camino in 2010. But now there's a pilgrimage route that traces from Ignatius's home in Loyola to Manresa and Montserrat, his original pilgrimage after his conversion. And we actually visited those places after our Camino by modern means. But anyway, so that was my interest, in having that chance to walk in Ignatius's footsteps.
And
John, if I may just jump in.
No, go ahead.
No, just that idea that, this is, Ignatius loved to walk as a spiritual practice. I mean, the first thing he did right after his conversion is, put on his shoes and head out the door and trek cross country. And he called himself in the third person, the pilgrim, And so this made a great deal of sense to me to imitate him as a, with my walking stick.
Right. So say something about why you would do this more than once. I hope that people will read your book. They'll learn all about your experience the first time, but you've already mentioned a couple of times that you've done this 2 more times since. It's quite a commitment, right? I mean, what does it take? A month of your life? More?
Yeah, it does. And young super trekkers can do it in about 33 days or so, 33, 35. We take our time and we have break days and everything. Again, it's not about the trek itself. It's about the retreat and to have a little bit of extra time in the cathedral cities and those type of things. We did it the second time, it was a time of transition, moved back to Montana. We invited our adult son to do it with us. And, the adage 3 is a crowd, but that didn't play out. We had a great time with our son. And this time in the original Camino, we did stop in Santiago. This time we said, hey, we're going to go on to Muxia out on the coast and then down to Finisterre. And we did that. And then this last Camino, my wife got a left tibia fracture, tibia plateau fracture, about 8 days into it. And she was in a great deal of pain and had to go on, taxis and buses and such to keep going. And when we came back and had it and it was x-rayed, it was actually, it had broken all the way through. So, but anyway, why would we do it? The reasons didn't change. We didn't somehow say, this one is about a super trek, a grandiose hike. The reasons were the same. And it is to place ourselves in that situation where we're apart from the distractions, the responsibilities, the everyday life, setting aside that for 40 days and just being with God.
Well, and on that, tell us about the Camino within. I remember one of the more powerful chapters in your book is called the Camino within. What does that mean? What does it mean to you?
Again, it's setting aside everything else so that you can focus, but not, there could be a misnomer, a misunderstanding that this is introspective. It isn't. It is letting go. It's coming to the realization as you're walking along that, you know what? This is all retreat. This is all pilgrimage. It doesn't matter if I'm doing my Coke break, if I'm looking at a beautiful translucent beetle or something along the trail. It's all keeping company with God. And John, in a real unself-conscious way, in an effortless way, that I believe God invited us. God always invites the encounter with God to hang out with Him for a month and a half, and in a set aside kind of way, and so So that was the realization, and that was the impetus for my book. Hey, others can do this too. Others can have this, whether they, tootle around their backyard, down the street, around the neighborhood, cross town, or a 500-mile pilgrimage or something in between. That people can have that experience of routinely walking with God, and it is an interior, it is the Camino within, the way within, but not in a self-conscious way. That's the point I want to make.
Well, now you are, of course, an expert on this. I mean, not only did you write a book about it, but you've then done it twice again since writing your book. So what advice do you give people who are contemplating walking the Camino or taking any serious pilgrimage? Because there are others. There are Anglican ones, there are Catholic ones, there are Muslim ones, there are all sorts of pilgrimages one can take. And some of them are physically arduous and others less so, but also on the psychological and spiritual side of things. What advice would you give people? Don't walk the Camino unless...
What I would say is consider your intent, because that makes all the difference. If you're intending a spiritual pilgrimage, if you're intending to just hang out with God for a period in a set aside kind of, I don't know how better to say it, then that's going to make all the difference, your intention. And so how you approach it, how you meet up with other people, and your generosity, and all of those kinds of things is going to it's going to make a difference in how you do it. And let's talk about maybe our mini pilgrimages and stuff. I think it's important as we walk to church, walk to the synagogue, walk to the shrine, walk to the mosque, that we begin with some recognition that we're walking with somebody. It would be kind of funny for me to come up to your door, John, and go, like, what does Luke want to do? What's the heck's that about? Oh, he wants to go for a walk with you. We naturally do a little, hey, how are you? And I think we should do that with our pilgrimages, with our walks with the Lord. God, thank you for inviting me to walk along with you this morning. And then beyond that, these are the agenda-free walks of friendship, walking with Jesus as a friend. And so I do think that they ought to end with a recognition of gratitude. Hey, thank you, God, for walking along with me today. What a wonderful experience. So, I think I'll leave it at what is your intention? And not that it has to be some grandiose thing. Keep it simple. Don't complicate it. Don't overthink it. Even with the pilgrimage,
Did you meet people who had other purposes in mind on the way? I'm thinking of people that I know who have walked the Camino after some sort of dramatic life change, stage of life change, or after the ending of an important relationship, after the death of a parent or someone who was very important to them. I also think of people I know who have walked the Camino, even in the 21st century, who have done it with a sense of penance for some reason, some purpose. Did you meet people like that?
We did. We certainly did. We early on in our latest pilgrimage, we were sitting across from a gentleman and at the dinner table, and why are you doing it? Why is this I think it was his third, at least his second. And my wife and I had planned to do the pilgrimage together. She just recently died, and then he was in tears. That think given those tragic circumstances, that's not, what we want, anybody would want. But given those kinds of things that happen in our life, I think that the Camino and other pilgrimages like it are a marvelous way to grieve, to let go, and that's depicted in Martin Sheen's movie, The Way. That's why he walked ostensibly to grieve. And we're incarnated spirits, we're in flesh spirits, right? So to walk as a way of letting go, of grieving, makes a great deal of sense to me. And I think, even if our faith or our relationship with God has kind of fallen away, or like we're angry with God, the streets. No, I mean, put on your hiking shoes and go out and walk around. And, you've had those experiences where somebody says, hey, I really need to talk with you. Let's go take a walk, and they need your undivided attention. They want you to leave everything and then head out and start walking down the block. So I think that there's all kinds of very therapeutic, basic human ways to use, even call them mini pilgrimages, or anything, something as substantial as the Camino, to return to God, a relationship with God, reconcile with God, reconcile with yourself, reconcile with the grief that you're feeling. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm just signaling to Sister Estelle that then we'll turn it over to others, because I know there are people watching who have questions for you. So my last question is, we haven't addressed the end of the pilgrimage, the end of the way of Santiago. And I know that there's something sort of cathartic, something amazing that one feels when you get to the end. You've walked for 40 days, 10 or 15 miles a day, despite the possibility of a nice bath at the end of some of those days. You're tired, your ankles hurt, you're dirty. You get to this church, right? This amazing structure, probably in time for Mass. I mean, explain what it's like. Explain what you see. Explain what you feel.
And it's different for everybody. A common experience, there is that euphoria of having arrived. And so, one of the first things that pilgrims do, and you'll see these posted all over the internet, the pose in front of the cathedral, and, I did it, and the walking sticks raised high. And there is another experience, and it's a letdown because, it's over. It's this wonderful experience of walking and truly, into my wife, all of those kinds of things, all of that encapsulated experience, that unique environment has come to an end. So it's mixed, there's mixed feelings. When you put on your regular clothes and stuff, it's like a costume change that, we weren't ready for. We weren't ready to give up our identity as pilgrims. And I imagine we're not alone in that, right? There are mixed feelings with most that have made that trip.
Yeah. All right. Now, Sister Estelle, you have some questions, I'll bet.
Yes, we have some really good questions from the audience. The first one is actually for you, John, from Catherine Westling. She says, Mr. Sweeney, if you have seen 100 proposals for books related to the Camino, what about Larson's proposal, idea, or memoir stood out to you? That's a good question. I was wondering the same thing.
It is a good question. Luke's book is the only one that I've ever accepted and published. And I probably still see one a month, I would guess.
Oh.
So Luke's was original in the way that he had been, as I mentioned before in one of my questions to him, the way he had been a Jesuit in formation and the way that he wove and weaves Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who, as Luke mentioned, many of the important episodes in his life, and he lived an incredibly dramatic, life that's made for the movies, took place in places not far from the Camino. So combining that made it something special, made it more than a sort of spiritual awakening memoir, which is what most of the books that I've seen do. And many of them are lovely. And I've read several. I've also read some of the sort of historical ones because I have a real interest in late medieval history as well. So I recommend many of them. But I liked Luke's as a memoir because of what else he brought to it. And he's also a great writer. So those are the things that drew me to it.
Yeah, that's great. Catherine also followed up that question with another one. She said, I started reading this book last week, and I'm impressed by the author's knowledge of the life of Saint Ignatius in specific details. I know that he has some Jesuit education, but he must have done more research on Ignatius for this memoir. This is a question for the author. What is an interesting and engaging biography of Saint Ignatius that you would recommend?
I would start with his autobiography. It's very thin, it's a tribute to his humility. To get that quick flavor of Ignatius, just turn to his autobiography, and in it he calls himself the Pilgrim, and especially details or focuses on his conversion experience, and it's very applicable for us today. The thing is not a book or a biography. I would turn your attention to the Saint Ignatius, the recent movie. I don't know just Google it. You'll have the recent movie of Saint Ignatius. It's very well done.
Good. Okay. And then
I'll throw one other in there. It's called The First Jesuits by John O'Malley. It's not just a biography of Ignatius of Loyola, but also Francis Xavier and Peter Faber.
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
Great. Leith Griffin says, how long did it take you to walk? And how many miles did you do per day? And are there any sightseeing spots?
Okay. Thanks, Leith.
Not Euro Disney, right?
We did the first one in 48 days, which is, when we were first starting out talking with other pilgrims, they're going, you can do it a lot faster than that. But we were blessed with the time and the resources. I had a sabbatical leave from my work to take our time. And so we did. We spent break days in all the cathedral cities. The thing that we did talking about an excursion or whatever, was to walk from Naharis up to the ancient monasteries of Sosa and Yusa and Benedictine monasteries. And they're about, I had it in kilometers, about 13 miles off of the traditional Camino route, the Camino Francais, as they say. That was, and then we spent 3 days there. That was a marvelous experience. It was a little retreat in itself. But again, it was all walking. We walked up to it and then did a kind of a circuitous route back to the main thing. That you know, I might not need to say this, but that in itself was an authentic thing to do. Pilgrims didn't, you know, have yellow arrows 1,000 years ago saying, now you must stay on this route. You know, they went wherever, you know, the shrines or the monasteries or whatever, whatever called them, whatever drew them. And so that would have been a kind of a side trip for us that made it special.
That's great. We have a question from Peter Haig, who I know is a fellow Camino walker. What types of prayers did you do along the way? And he also said, did your prayer life change during the Camino and between the Caminos?
Yeah, so, you know, you'll walk along with people, or they'll pass you that are doing rosaries together and all of that kind of thing. We did not do that. What we did was, so we didn't do, you know, rote or I don't know what a better word would, as we walked, everything. Our prayer was more internal. So every day we dedicated the day to somebody in our family, colleagues or whatever. Today we're praying for our grandson, Andrew, you know. And so then we would think about that person all throughout and pray for them. Some days we conversed prayerfully about Saint Francis of Assisi or whatever, you know, that type of thing. We always ended our day in prayer. We do that as a couple anyway, but before going to bed, we pray together. But really, I would be deviating from my point of this whole webinar to say that, you know, you should suggest loading up your prayer walks or your pilgrimages with a lot of prayer. No, the walking along with God, keeping company with God and God's friends, heaven on earth, is prayer, you know? So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
This is from an anonymous attendee. Have you considered walking any of the other Camino routes?
Yes, considered. We haven't yet. They're all intriguing. The Camino Norte takes you along the northern coast. I love the idea of going through Portugal up to Santiago. I'd love to do the Camino Ignaciano, the Ignatian way that retraces his pilgrimage across that part of Spain. Whether there's enough life left. You know, if my wife keeps breaking her leg on these things, you know, it's not. No, yes, we've considered, we love the idea. Whether it comes to pass, it may be a bucket list, who knows?
Yeah. You made a comment when you were talking, Luke, about not planning ahead. And we have a question from L. Todd. He said, how did you organize your first trip? You mentioned not planning ahead, but how did you know what to expect?
Good question. So we knew the places where we wanted to stay, you know, and the Camino is quite well laid out. You can choose to stay at this town or that town or whatever, but generally the guidebooks give you pretty distinct destinations. And so in not choosing for the whole Camino where we're going to stay, we just, you know, when you're in this town, you ask one of the locals, will you call ahead for us? And people were quite willing to do that and then book a reservation for that night. So we didn't know where specifically we were going to stay, but we had an idea of the next town. And I'm trying to think of what they call it, the Camino Mentality or something. I can't, and it's a kind of a racing mentality that especially younger people have, because they want to get to the next albergate before others so that they can get a spot or a better spot, And we just didn't, that would have defeated our whole leisurely walking retreat experience. So we didn't want to get into that mentality. Mm-hmm. The race to the next albergate.
Yeah. Peter also is asking, did you sense that you had changed as a result of the Camino?
Absolutely, yes, unequivocally, and so did my wife, and yeah, and again, in ways that you don't start off anticipating. You recognize as pure gift, pure grace. And I know why Peter's asking this, because I'm sure he has too, and well, I know he has in his comments with me. The effects of the Camino go on and on. I mean, you have that pilgrim's blood thereafter, and I think that's a great metaphor for life, don't you? That we're all pilgrims on the way, and to have that mentality, that spirituality, that we're all on the way. We're all moving step by step closer to God and to the kingdom. I love that notion, by the way, of when we take a step toward God, God takes 2 steps toward us. I even like it better that God rushes toward us. You can.
Yeah.
It's a great Camino image or pilgrimage image.
That's awesome. Jessica Brown says, my husband and young son and I want to turn the local hikes here in Ireland into a Camino experience as best we can for us with lockdown. We're going to try to follow the Camino day, starting out early and coming back for supper for a few days in a row. Any suggestions for prayers to say or an aspect to the rhythm that would be good for us to think about? Thank you so much. This is a wonderful talk. That's Jessica.
Jessica, thank you so very much. What a wonderful idea, first of all, and I commend you for doing it. But in our promoting the book and thinking about it afterwards, I know Paraclete Press and I talked about keeping company walks, and that's what you're doing, Jessica, is walking, doing a day-long pilgrimage for the sake of keeping company with God, for being present with, accompanying Jesus. And so I really emphasize that notion of keeping it simple, keeping it uncomplicated. Begin with prayer, begin with group prayer, and that can be spontaneous, but have some kind of intention for the walk. It can be individual. I am walking because I really need to feel refreshed in the Lord. Today I'm walking because I really need a sense of forgiveness, or I need to let go of this guilt, or whatever those things are. Have an intention, and then walk as you would any friend, loved one, family member. Don't let pious preconceptions and oughts and shoulds and stuff get in the way of a good walk. And then end the walk with prayer as well. This is something, Jessica reminds us of. This is a great activity for churches, prayer groups, faith sharing groups. Take a group walk together, and if you're with a youth group, do it in the evening, do it at night, do a flashlight walk. They love it, right? but don't worry about, all the kids are chatting too much or whatever. No, just let that experience of walking with the Lord seep in.
And I think we have one last question, Luke. As John Sweeney mentioned, there are many books about the way. Martin Sheen recommends your book on the front cover. I enjoyed his performance in the film The Way. Have the two of you met? And if not, how did he get his hands on your book?
I'll tell the story quickly. That I had asked through Martin Sheen's publisher, his
Publicist?
writing publisher,
Okay.
writing agent, to help me get in touch with him. And so my wife and I are on a sailing trip, a sailboat in the San Juan Islands, and I get this call on my cell phone. Hello, Mr. Larson. This is Martin Sheen. If anybody had ever told me that Martin Sheen was ever going to give me a call I would have, had my throat, a lump in my throat. But he's so kind and so gentle and so, so I haven't met him in person. I've had 2 conversations with him. John, and I got a hold of you, and it's just, and Martin Sheen's willing to endorse the book, but that was a thrill. It truly a thrill of my lifetime to meet him. He's a man of incredible faith. As we're recommending books, pick up his book that is his autobiography along with his son Emilio Estevez. They did a combined autobiography. It talks about a lot of the behind the scenes of the Way, the movie, but it's just a great read, and it talks about all of his struggles as an earlier actor and all of that. So, yeah, I had a great experience talking with Martin Sheen.
Fun.
Great,
Never
very,
heard
very
that
grateful.
story, Luke. That's great. Now, before we close, I just want you to let everybody know, we're going to do a follow-up email at the end of this to everybody who signed up for this webinar. And you wanted to give them the pocket guide to keeping company with Saint Ignatius. So we've made that into a downloadable pocket guide that they can print out. Can you tell them a little bit about that and how they can use it, Luke?
Yeah, and so we're using the language of keeping company walks as a way of talking about walking with Jesus or God as an individual, couple, family, church group, whatever the grouping. And it's some guidance on how to do that. Some of the things that we've talked about in the course of this conversation, but it's something that you can literally just stick in your hip pocket and refer to with suggestions on how to walk as a spiritual practice. And thank you for making it available.
Yeah, we're so happy to be able to do that for you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything you want to say in closing?
Well, and I welcome the chance, maybe I hope I won't regret this, but I welcome the chance for people to email me, to communicate with me, because people will have questions. And so Larson Coaching, Larson coaching @gmail.com. And I truly do, I sincerely do welcome people to continue the conversation with me.
That's great. I'm sure you'll get some emails from eager Compostela walking buddies.
Yeah, I can always talk about, that's always a great conversation.
Anything you want to say, John?
No, thanks for putting this on. It's been great to spend some time with you, Luke.
Thank you, John. I am very, very grateful. I know you're taking some time away from a break or your other activities, and so it means the world to me that you're willing to do this. Thank you. I think we should have been switched places in terms of our background. I should be trees. That's for the next one.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Luke and John, for sharing with us today. I'm sure we all feel that the next time we go for a leisurely walk, we might consider it a good time for prayer. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Luke's book, Keeping Company with Saint Ignatius, and several of John Sweeney's books on Franciscan spirituality are available from your local booksellers and, of course, from paracletepress.com. If you use the coupon code RETREAT2020, it will take 20% off your order. So that's great. So go on our website and use that coupon code. We'll be sending you an email later this afternoon, like I said, which will contain a free downloadable pocket guide to keeping company walks that Luke wanted to share with you for joining the webinar, and we hope you enjoy that. Please consider gifting their books to friends and family. Your generosity is going to really help support our authors in their work and ministry, as well as Paraclete Press in our ongoing work in providing free webinars such as this at this time. We also wanted you to know that this Friday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., we're hosting an online day retreat with celebrated lecturer and author Angela Alamo O'Donnell. And the retreat is titled On Pilgrimage with Flannery O'Connor, In Search of the Province of Joy. If you're interested in joining, please register by clicking on our website on the upcoming online events, summer retreat series on our website. So that's on upcoming online events, summer retreat series. There'll be many others, such as Sybil Macbeth praying in color, Father Von Rollheiser on mysticism. So it's a great lineup this summer. We hope you enjoyed this talk as much as we did. Our prayers are with all of you for health and safety, and we hope you'll join us for more of these times together. So God bless you, everybody. God bless you, Luke and John. Have a wonderful day. It's a nice day here on Cape Cod. God bless you all.